Okay, let's get started. So again, warm welcome to everyone. We have ingredient providers as well as brands. We've got some contract manufacturers. We've got participants from all around the world. It's a very exciting topic that we're going to cover today. We're going to cover U.S. regulatory pathways for both human and animal ingredients. Here's our agenda for today. I'm going to give a very brief introduction and company overview for both Nutrasource, SGS, and GRAS Associates. We're all one company. And then I'll hand it over to Amy, who's going to cover food and dietary supplements. And then we're going to have Margetta cover livestock, feed, and companion animal regulatory. Following that, we're going to have Josh give an explanation for claim substantiation for ingredients through clinical trials and all things that are relevant there for establishing a branded ingredient pathway. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So obviously, thank you for joining. This webinar will be recorded, and we will send out a link for participants that you can share with your colleagues and for folks who have registered that were not able to make it this morning. And throughout the presentation, feel free to ask any questions that you have in the chat window. We have left time at the end for a lot of good Q&A, and any questions that we don't get to, we will certainly follow up with you and make sure that we're able to answer all of your questions. So a little bit about SGS Nutrasource. Nutrasource has been in business for 21 years, over 3,000 projects successfully completed worldwide, over 20,000 supported product launches. That includes ingredients in all categories, both pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals, as well as finished brands. We have 150 employees globally. We've represented over 2,000 clients globally in getting into these markets that they want to sell into. And very exciting, we were acquired by SGS in May of 2023. We have many subsidiary brands. The one that we're focusing on today is called GRAS Associates. This is led by Amy Mazingo, and this department takes care of all FDA regulatory for both finished brands and ingredients, getting into any and all categories of which we'll talk about today. We also have a third-party certification program for brands and ingredients, which we'll have future webinars on. We do have our own clinical trial sites, and we also have an office, I wanted to point out, within Asia to service the markets there from a local perspective. So a big question that everybody asks us is, hey, listen, why did SGS acquire Nutrasource? It's a very, very exciting acquisition. I know that many of you have perhaps worked with SGS in the past for analytical testing. They might be doing your audit and certification as it relates to GMP or ISO, or custom inspections as necessary. Why SGS acquired Nutrasource was specifically to enhance and enlarge their regulatory compliance and advisory services, specifically in the areas of ingredient regulatory for all the categories that we're going to cover today, as well as clinical trials for both safety and efficacy, leading to claim substantiation, which is obviously necessary for increasing sales through claims. The range of services that we offer is all the way from product development, regulatory consulting. We do scientific publication services, product certifications, and analytical and bioanalytical testing. And now let's get to today's discussion. It's going to be very focused. What we're going to present is the compliance and claim substantiation strategies for new ingredients coming into the US. We're going to cover food, dietary supplements, livestock feed, pet food, specifically cat and dog food, and then the up-and-coming and very large marketplace, which I know most of you are very aware of and looking into, and that's the pet supplement market. So at this point in time, I'm going to hand it over to Amy Mazingo, and we'll get right into it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Mazingo, VP of U.S. Nutra-Regulatory Sciences, and I've been doing this for 20 plus years, specialty areas in GRAS, NDIN, also very experienced in product labeling, formulation reviews, compliance reviews, structure function claim substantiation. So I'm pleased to be here with you today. So I'll be presenting today on the U.S. regulatory related to food and dietary supplements. And first, we'll start with what are food ingredients. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act defines food as articles used for food or drink for man or other animals, chewing gum, and articles used for components of any such article. So this essentially means any ingredient or component in the food. The classification of food ingredients are food additives, color additives, GRAS substances, and prior sanctioned substances. So we'll start with food additives. The 1958 Food Additives Amendment established direct food additives and indirect food additives. Now, by definition, a food additive is any substance that by the intended use may be expected to become a component or otherwise affect the characteristic of a food. A food additive is really largely described by what it's not. It's not a color additive. It's not a GRAS ingredient, nor prior sanction ingredient. It's not a dietary ingredient, which is the active ingredient in a dietary supplement. It's not a pesticide or a new animal drug. A direct food additive is just that. It's added directly into the food. An indirect food additive, that's an ingredient that comes into contact with the food as part of the packaging, holding, or processing. These ingredients are not intended to be added directly to the food and are not intended to have a technical effect in the finished food. Examples of these indirect food additives include processing aids and food contact materials. The Food Additive Petition process is a pre-market approval process. A color additive is any dye, pigment, or substance which, when added or applied to a food, it imparts color. Many ingredients that are GRAS for certain uses may also require a color additive petition if the ingredient is added to foods to which it imparts color. An example of this would be tomato lycopene. It was notified as GRAS to FDA and received a no questions letter back in 2005. The letter from FDA did note that some uses may require color additive listing. Subsequently, a color additive petition was filed, and tomato lycopene extract and the concentrate are color additives that are allowed for food, and it's exempt for certification. Like the Food Additive Petition process, a color additive petition is a pre-market approval process, and it involves rulemaking and promulgation of a regulation if it's approved. For GRAS substances. A GRAS substance is generally recognized as safe, or GRAS, among qualified experts under the conditions of its intended use. GRAS conclusions can be based on history of use or scientific procedures. Today, most GRAS determinations are through scientific procedures. To be clear, GRAS is not a pre-market approval process. Pre-market notification to FDA is not required, but a notification process is in place. GRAS, in many cases, is an alternative to the Food Additive Petition process or the new dietary ingredient notification process. Now, the level of data required to support the safety is the same for GRAS or a food additive. Prior sanction ingredients are those approved for use by FDA or the United States Department of Agriculture prior to the 1958 Food Additives provision, and those can be found in 21 CFR Part 181. So now let's talk a little bit about dietary supplements and the U.S. regulatory framework for that. So dietary supplements are a separate category, but are under the umbrella of food. And in 1994, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, which we refer to as DSHEA, was passed, and this established the category of dietary supplements as well as the specific safety and labeling requirements for the category. Before 1994, FDA regulated what we now know as dietary supplements as foods or drugs or both. DSHEA defined and limits dietary supplements as a product other than tobacco that's intended to supplement the diet that includes one or more of the following: a vitamin, mineral, herb or other botanical, amino acid, dietary substance for use by man to supplement the diet, or a concentrate, metabolite, constituent, extract, or combination of any of those items. There are limits to what a dietary supplement can be marketed as. A dietary supplement is a product that has to be taken by mouth that contains a dietary ingredient intended to supplement the diet. Dietary supplements are limited to ingestion, so a dietary supplement cannot be a topical product, and it can't even be the sublingual route. It must be ingested. The form of a dietary supplement can vary. In forms such as capsules, gummies, liquids, or bars, they are permitted. These cannot, however, be represented as conventional foods or as the sole item of a meal or diet, and they must be, again, labeled as dietary supplements. The regulations for dietary supplements apply to dietary supplements for humans and do not extend to animals. So what is a new dietary ingredient? A new dietary ingredient, or NDI, is one that was not marketed as an ingredient in a dietary supplement in the United States before October 15, 1994. If the ingredient has been marketed in a dietary supplement prior to that passage of DSHEA, then these are considered grandfathered, and we refer to those as old dietary ingredients. Now, in the case of a new dietary ingredient, pre-market notification to FDA is required within 75 days before the first marketing of the ingredient in a dietary supplement. Now, this is unless the dietary supplement contains only dietary ingredients that are present in the food supply as an article used for food and it has not been chemically altered. Now, from a regulatory strategy approach, for a client with a new ingredient and they wish to use it in dietary supplements, the first thing that we have to do is to determine if the ingredient meets the definition of a dietary ingredient as defined by DSHEA. So we'll take a look at this decision flow chart. That's a decision tree. And for us, it's important to understand the appropriate pathway for an ingredient to enter the U.S. market. Sometimes companies only wish to sell their ingredient in a dietary supplement, but that alone does not determine the appropriate regulatory pathway to take. The first question that we have to ask is, does the ingredient meet the definition of a dietary ingredient? And is there proof it was used in a dietary supplement before the passage of DSHEA? If so, then the ingredient is an old dietary ingredient and no further action is required. However, if the ingredient is not an ODI, the next question we ask is, does it meet the definition of a dietary ingredient? If it meets the definition of a dietary ingredient, then either the GRAS or the NDIN pathway is available. An example of this would be, let's take a live microbial that was isolated from a fermented food. It would qualify as a dietary ingredient because it's a dietary substance. It's consumed as a component of the fermented food. And in this case, either option would be available. If, however, the live microbial is not found in the food supply, say it was isolated from the soil, then it would not meet the definition of a dietary ingredient, and only the GRAS pathway would be available. Once the ingredient is GRAS and in the food supply, it now becomes a dietary substance and meets the definition of a dietary ingredient. That ingredient can now be used in dietary supplements without the requirement of a new dietary ingredient notification, provided that ingredient is exactly the same ingredient that is GRAS and it is present in the food supply. And the image on the right, you see, has a QR code that will lead you to a blog with some additional information. So let's take a look at the requirements for GRAS and NDIN. The information requirements are specific and extensive, and we typically start with a feasibility assessment and gap analysis to ensure that the sponsor's data set is robust enough to start the full project. Detailed information required for both GRAS and NDIN include manufacturing, identity of the ingredient, specifications. The manufacturing information should include descriptive details of the manufacturing process, the controls that are in place throughout the manufacturing process, and the methods used to confirm identity and purity of the ingredient. This includes information on potential contaminants and stability data, if available. For an NDIN, or New Dietary Ingredient Notification, the raw material and component specifications are expected to be provided with the submission, along with detailed information on the controls that are in place throughout the manufacturing process to ensure the identity, purity, and strength of the dietary ingredient. Adequate information to assure that the materials are manufactured under controls equivalent to established good manufacturing practices in place for food and dietary supplements are required. So for the ingredient food uses, this applies to GRAS, as the foods to which the ingredient will be added need to be identified and the levels of use must be declared. And an intake analysis or an exposure assessment must be performed using the data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, or NHANES. For an NDIN, the daily intake is based on the suggested intake and the labeling of the product. For new ingredients, safety must be established, and typically safety studies specific to the ingredient are required. Published information on similar or substantially equivalent materials may also be used. And we also take a look at any historical consumption or known use in the food supply in other jurisdictions. That's also relevant information, as well as to include any known adverse effects. And finally, for truly novel ingredients, a minimum standard suite of safety studies is typically required. So to take a look at some of the main differences between GRAS and NDIN, one thing is data protection. The GRAS process does require that the data to support the safety of the ingredient is publicly available. The NDIN pathway allows for this information to be confidential and not made public. The safety standard is slightly different in that GRAS is reasonable certainty of no harm, and the NDIN is reasonably expected to be safe. GRAS, keep in mind, is for regular conventional foods, so the intended use must be safe for the population in general, while dietary supplements can exclude populations from the labeling. For example, you can exclude use by children or pregnant nursing women. And finally, the GRAS notification is voluntary. The NDIN notification is mandatory. But for both the NDIN and the GRAS, they're not rulemaking. They are, and we'll go into that a little bit later. And finally, the NDIN does require that all cited references be provided, while the GRAS process does not. So we'll take a quick look at the timelines for GRAS versus NDIN. The time required to compile a dossier is typically 6 months. However, if safety data must be generated, the process can be 2 years or more, depending on what studies must be conducted. The GRAS process also requires the public availability of the pivotal safety data, meaning the results of safety studies must be published in a peer-reviewed journal, and that can also add to the timeline for a GRAS dossier project. So in general, the GRAS notification process does take longer than the NDIN process. The GRAS notice group, if a company decides to notify FDA, the GRAS notice group conducts a pre-file review that can take 3 months or more. And once they complete this review and determine that the submission is complete and accepted for filing, that's when they issue a GRN number and the 180-day clock for review starts. If FDA has questions and additional data is submitted and FDA considers it substantial, they have the option to reset the clock. The same is true for the NDIN process. However, the review timeline for the NDIN process is much shorter. It's 75 days from submission to filing a closeout letter. Now, neither the GRAS notification nor the NDIN notification processes are approval processes. The desired outcome for GRAS is the receipt of a no questions letter. and for an NDIN, an acknowledgement letter with no objection. And so as a recap, some services offered for food include GRAS, Food Additive and Color Additive Petition, regulatory compliance, opinion letters, risk or safety assessments, and exposure assessments, which are dietary intake assessments. And services offered for dietary supplements include GRAS or NDIN, structure function claim substantiation services, which we really didn't cover, but we regularly provide those services. And under our umbrella, we do that as a literature-based service, and Josh will speak later on the clinical services. We also offer regulatory compliance, which would include but not be limited to opinion letters, formula safety assessments, and labeling. And so now I will turn this over to Dr. Zwenka as she's going to present on the U.S. regulatory for livestock feed and companion animals.
Amy, and hello, everybody. I'm the Director of Preclinical and Companion Animal Services at SGS Nutrasource, and I've been working in the animal health industry for over 25 years, and specifically in the nutritional and pharma product safety evaluation area for both human and animals for over 20 years. So I'll be covering the U.S. regulatory aspects for products intended for use in animals, both in feed and supplements. But first, I'd like to discuss some preclinical and efficacy, as well as proof of concept studies, because those can apply to both human products, as Amy was discussing, as well as products intended for animals. So in the U.S. market, the support for safety of novel food and dietary supplements, or pharma, requires some specific safety information. While we don't conduct the testing, we do work with a network of CROs to generate the required data on behalf of our clients. And this allows us to select the CRO with the most experience for the studies and possibly for your ingredient to conduct those studies. The typical suite of safety studies needed to support food or dietary supplement ingredients for humans is shown on the right. And these can include both in vitro and in vivo studies. And while these are the typical ones, the studies needed can vary depending on your ingredient and what other information you have available. And these studies should generally be conducted in compliance with good laboratory practices and follow an accepted guidelines such as OECD. So what we provide is study management services, including placement and monitoring. And one of our board certified toxicologists is in regular communication with the CRO during the studies, and they evaluate some interim results and keep the sponsor updated on how the study's going and if there's any unexpected results. They're also involved in protocol development, data interpretation, and review of that final or the draft report before it's finalized. In addition to the required safety studies, we also assist clients with proof of concept studies, efficacy studies, or any others that are required for their product and intended goal. Well, and this is again where our relationship with multiple CROs provides us a benefit in that we can select the CRO that has experience in the required area. And these studies are often specifically designed for the client's needs. And they can be in vitro, they can be in vivo, they can be in multiple species, or whatever's required. Again, these can be for ingredients intended for both humans as well as products for animals. So moving to animal-specific information, and as Chris said, and I'm sure those of you in the animal space are wanting to enter the animal space, there is exciting growth and expanding markets in the pet nutrition and supplement area. And while this is often a focus for our clients, these opportunities aren't limited to companion animals, and there are opportunities in livestock and production animals as well. So in the US, there's some various pathways available for ingredients used both in companion animals as well as livestock. The Food Additive Petition process is a pre-market approval and rulemaking process, just like with human ingredients. And there is also a GRAS notification program under FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine. And while notification to FDA, as with human ingredients, is not mandatory, it's advised because some states won't accept ingredient into the animal food supply with a self-GRAS, meaning that it has not been notified and has not received a no questions letter from FDA. There is a third option, which is a feed ingredient definition under the American Association of Feed Control Officials, or AAFCO. And there's positive and negative elements with each of these processes, and we work with our clients to understand their goals and limitations associated with their project, and then advise on the best pathway to achieve compliance. And I have NASC up there, and I'll discuss that a little bit more when I get to pet supplements specifically. So once we've determined the appropriate regulatory pathway, meaning that we have determined that your ingredient's appropriate for use in animal food, we can then begin to plan out your strategy for your ingredient. And in reality, much of the data required for any of these pathways is similar. So we review the available data to identify any gaps, and then we develop a plan to fill those gaps. We can then move on to preparing the work product for the regulatory pathway that's been selected. And timelines for the regulatory submission can vary and really depends on what data is available and what needs to be generated. So we cover these early on in the development process. Ingredients is for companion animals or for production animals. The ingredients, for addition to food, require sufficient safety information in the target species at the desired life stage, as well as information on the utility or why it's being added to food. For ingredients used in production animals, you also have to have sufficient safety information for the humans consuming the edible products from those animals, such as the milk or the eggs. And the information in the published literature can be used to support the safety in both your companion animals or production animals. And as I mentioned earlier, the pivotal information has to be in the target species, as well as the desired life stage or stages. This means that you can't conduct a study in adult dogs and use that as a key safety information if you want to use that same ingredient in puppies. And while studies in rodents or other species or even other life stages can be used to support the safety of your ingredient, you do have to conduct those studies or have that information in the target species. And rodent safety information on the ingredient can definitely be used to support that human safety for those consuming those edible products from the production animals. So if you have an ingredient or product which is considered a dietary supplement for companion animals, they fit into a bit of a unique category, which doesn't really have a legal definition or classification within US regulations. We understand how to navigate this area, and we work very closely with the National Animal Supplement Council, or NASC, to best advise clients who want to be in this space. And even though there's no specific regulatory category with defined data requirements, we recommend that you should still have sufficient safety information in the target species at the appropriate life stage, as well as sufficient scientific information to support the utility and claims that you would like to make. This information can again be from published literature on similar products or ingredients, or on specific studies that you have conducted with your ingredient. We can provide reports which can be used to support the safety of your ingredient, as well as claim substantiation documentation for the specific claims you wish to make. And this information you can just keep it on file should you ever require it. So as discussed earlier, we usually recommend starting with a gap analysis where we review all of the available information that you have, as well as what's available in the published literature to identify any gaps. And then we make recommendations on how to gather the data to fill those gaps, which may include studies that are required. We can also assist with FDA communications, which can include meetings. And there's a couple options that I just wanted to highlight that we use, and I just want to cover those a little bit. One of those is an investigational feed additive file, which allows for a confidential exchange of information with FDA while we develop that safety or utility information for your ingredient. And the other, which applies only to production animals, is investigational food use authorization. And what that allows is that if you're conducting a study in production animals, it allows those products from those animals to enter the human food chain rather than being wasted. Another option that we often recommend when there's a need to conduct target animal safety studies or utility studies is that you submit the protocol to the FDA-CVM for review prior to conducting your study. And this initial review helps minimize the risk of having to repeat a study due to a missed endpoint or time point. Unless if the intent of the study is really clear, we can sometimes skip that step, but we often recommend that gets done. And it's just another tool that we can use to make sure that we get your product to market in a more seamless fashion. And during all of this work, while we're gathering the safety and efficacy information, we can start preparing your submission documents for your ingredient. And then as we gather the information, we can incorporate that into the documents so that we can have it ready for submission. And with that, thank you very much, and I will turn it over to Josh.
Thanks, Margetta, and thanks everyone for attending today. Just briefly about me, I've got over 20 years experience from the dietary supplement industry, as well as some from small biotech prior to that, and crossing the entire product development life cycle from in vitro screening assays through in vivo efficacy models, toxicology models, quality assurance, regulatory affairs, and clinical trials. With respect to clinical trials, I've designed over 300 clinical trials and participated in over 100 clinical trials to date. So today I'm just going to give a little bit of a high-level overview of claims. So after your product is determined to, or your ingredients are determined to be safe, moving those into clinical research to get a claim on your ingredient, whether it's a branded ingredient or a single ingredient or multiple ingredients that you're combining together, claims will fall into one of a few different categories. So we often see marketing claims. These are claims such as it absorbed 2 times faster than another product. This could come up where you're reformulating an ingredient. Maybe you're adding a new technology to the ingredient and you want to showcase that it's got better absorption profile, or you want to market it, comparing it to different formulations on the market, just showing again yours is better than the competitor. So these again are very easy claims to substantiate, usually through pharmacokinetic designs, where you're looking at that absorption profile in the blood. Moving over to structure function claims, these are the most common for the dietary supplement industry. So these are claims such as supports, helps maintain, promotes. So for example, it may be a claim such as promotes joint health, maybe helps maintain healthy blood sugar level as part of a healthy diet. Moving to the right of that is health claims. These are claims that involve petitioning the FDA, and on approval, the claim that's granted must be used word for word. These are definitely more difficult to get because of the petition process that you go through. There's much more data required in order to substantiate these, and FDA will look at totality of evidence in the literature as well as the dossier submitted. And then moving to the far right here is therapeutic claims. These are claims that are not available for dietary supplements. These are your treats, prevents, mitigates disease or cures disease, relieves an indication, and it will involve an indication of some sort. So for example, relieves chronic constipation would fall into that therapeutic claim category because you're looking to treat the chronic constipation. However, if you're looking to support normal, healthy bowel movements, that would be a structure function claim. So the amount of clinical data required really is commensurate with the risk of the claim. So if structure function claims are minor in nature, those may be 1 to 2 clinical trials to support the claim. But if you move over to those therapeutic claims, which some ingredient manufacturers are looking to also go down that pathway to formulate an API or an active pharmaceutical ingredient, then a classical drug approach would be required, where you have to move through the various stages of research. And this can be a little bit tricky too on the clinical trial design side. So for example, in the structure function claims, we need to be looking at generally healthy participants. So oftentimes we have ingredient manufacturers coming to us wanting to do a study on glucose lowering in diabetic participants. That's something that would show an intent to the FDA that we're looking to treat diabetic participants and control their glucose. And that would automatically move it over to that therapeutic claim and require an investigational new drug application, or IND, in the US. However, if a company is looking to do that just to investigate, does their product have the potential to move down that drug pathway, but they want to remain as a dietary supplement in the US, we would take a different regulatory strategic approach and place a study like that in a country like Canada, where we could do it under the natural health product regulations. This wouldn't cross over any issues with the US. Conduct your research in the US, understand whether you have that potential to move that pathway under, again, the natural product regulatory framework, not a drug. And if successful, then you could leverage that data in your IND filing for downstream research to go down the drug pathway. However, that's usually not the case. So we would have to take that protocol and design it differently to steer clear of the indication of diabetes, bring it back to a healthy participant indication. And some of that is repositioning what the endpoints are in the trial, as well as looking at that population and where can we make an effect in a healthy participant without looking at diabetics. So is that pre-diabetes? Is it right prior to the pre-diabetic stage at those high normals? So it's critical when designing a clinical trial that we understand what the claims are involved downstream. What are the objectives of this ingredient or finished product going to market? And then we have to back that design up and look at the regulatory context surrounding that. And as Amy mentioned, sometimes we don't need to do a clinical trial. There may be sufficient data in the literature to support the claim that our clients are looking to get. And that's where her group would look at the claim substantiation process, review the literature, and determine whether there's a pathway available there or not. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Chris.
So I'm going to hit the super easy one first. Someone has said, is there a supply side east that you will be attending? So the answer to that is absolutely. So just certainly get in touch with us, and we can let you know where we'll be. And we're more than happy to set up a video call to get introduced even prior. So one of the big questions that I'm going to answer, which comes in all the time, and this one will be for Amy to answer, is what is the difference between a self-affirmed and a notified GRAS dossier?
Well, the self-affirmed is something that a lot of people use that terminology. That just means it's an independent GRAS that has not been notified to FDA. As mentioned in my presentation, notification to FDA is not mandatory. Unless it's like you want to use the ingredient in USDA regulated foods or in infant formula, then it's really highly recommended to notify FDA. There's no difference in the quality or the safety or the public availability of the information. A lot of companies, when they're doing an independent GRAS, they opt to utilize an expert panel to review the dossier and to confirm if they reach consensus that the ingredient is GRAS for the intended use. And that is, FDA has some best practices for convening an expert panel, which we go by in convening and placing and convening an expert panel. And it's our clients find that very useful because we do provide a standalone expert panel report that if it's an ingredient that is sold B2B, then the client can provide that expert panel report as proof of GRAS, and it provides details. It's more than just a certificate. It provides details as to the intended use, the conditions of use, the manufacturing, the specifications.
Excellent. And another one, Amy, that I know that we get all the time for you is there a bridge between NDIN/GRAS dossier and novel food dossier in the EU? Meaning, if we have an NDIN approval, would that make the novel food application easier and or quicker?
It would make it easier and quicker simply for the fact that you've compiled information that is common to both of those processes. The novel food does have some differences between what we do for GRAS or NDIN, but as a general rule, the bulk of the information that you've companies compiled for GRAS or NDIN would absolutely shorten the timeline to prepare their dossier for novel food.
Excellent. And I'll dovetail that just by letting you folks know, if you are looking and you need to have novel food, certainly still contact us because we can coordinate that with you. We do that for many clients. We have a very trusted partner that we've worked with for 20 years. So often we will design the safety studies in a manner that when we're doing the GRAS or NDIN, that they're also being done in a manner that can be completely relevant for your novel food. And now that I've got another question that has come in typically surrounding the same topic, and that is for other jurisdictions. So we have many Asian clients that have asked the question. We have regulatory status within our markets. We are wondering if the safety testing which was submitted in our country is also relevant for GRAS and NDIN.
Margetta, I think that you might want to fill that one.
Yeah. So the best way to register a feed ingredient in the US market, is that the question? Sorry, Chris.
No, it's for folks in Asia, they have regulatory status for their ingredient for human that has they have all the toxicology and that has been submitted there. They're wondering how we can evaluate whether the testing that they've done already is going to be relevant, or if they would need to redo testing on a toxicology level for the human ingredient.
Yeah, and that's very dependent on the studies. So often we can bridge in a different jurisdiction, but it does have to be done, like I discussed, according to GLP, and it does have to be based on an OECD guideline or a relevant guideline that's accepted.
Excellent. And I've got another question for Margetta. And this one says, I wonder if there are regulatory requirements for analytical testing for pet supplements now, maybe from one of the organizations mentioned in the slide.
So there are definitely analytical requirements. You have to, part of that safety evaluation and having that safety information is that you have exactly what's in your ingredient, and that you can also show that you can consistently manufacture that ingredient.
Excellent. Very easy one for you, Amy, and that would be, what is the approximate timeline for an independent GRAS?
With an expert panel, with an expert panel review, if we have everything that we need when we start, it would be around 6 months.
Excellent. And I've got another one for Margetta. What is the best way to register a new feed additive in the US market? Is it to register it as an NDIN GRAS or to propose a new definition in the AAFCO publication, which the data will also be, the question is, if you go through the AAFCO publication, will the data also be assessed by the FDA?
So the answer to the last part is an easy one. Yes, the FDA reviews the safety information for the AAFCO definition. The answer to what is the best way to market a new feed additive depends very much on what your goal is and what the ingredient is. So NDIN applies to humans; it doesn't apply to the animal market. But most often we do either GRAS or the AAFCO feed ingredient definition. But both of those have, especially the AAFCO, has a very defined set of what can be a feed ingredient definition. And then the other one, rather than NDIN, it's a food additive petition process that we can do. But yes, the amount of safety information or all the information that you require for any of those pathways is very similar. You need to have the same.
Excellent. And I've got a question here for Josh surrounding clinical trials. And so the question is, for a clinical trial to support a structure function claim, you mentioned that this clinical would include safety. Is it a requirement that blood parameters are tested, or is monitoring AEs and SEAs sufficient?
This really depends on what the goal of the project is and what you know about your product already or your ingredient. So if it's a well-known and well-characterized ingredient, let's say you're doing a calcium supplement, it's not a novel form of that, then AEs and SAEs would be sufficient. And this really comes down to also your risk as a company. Do you want that data? Do you need that data? There are other cases where your GRAS review process may indicate that there may be specific markers or blood markers of concern. Maybe it has the potential for hepatotoxicity. In that case, we would want those blood markers to show when we move to clinical research in humans that we don't have those effects, or what are those effects? What's a safe level? So it's very dependent on what the project is. So sometimes, yes, AEs and SAEs would be sufficient, and other times we would want to put in specific biomarkers and panels.
Excellent. And another one for clinical trials. And this one is, do we have any clinical trial experience in terms of determining kcal caloric value of an ingredient, and specifically using a method other than breath hydrogen?
We don't ourselves. However, in the greater SGS network, I'm sure that we do have a method for that, and that's something that we can look into and get back to the requester on this.
Excellent. And another one for Amy. If an ingredient has FDA GRAS, do we still need to have food supply reference for ingredient substantiation?
Okay, well, for that question, let's see. If it's FDA GRAS in the CFR, 21 CFR, if it's GRAS or GRAS affirmed, and it has a regulation, provided you meet any specifications and limitations set in the regulation, then it would be compliant for use. If that question is referring to GRAS notices that have, and you have a similar ingredient, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need a GRAS for your ingredient. You would need a GRAS for your ingredient because a GRAS is specific to the manufacturing process, the specifications, and the intended use. So I hope that answers the question.
Excellent. And I've got another one here that's that we get all the time. And so this one, I think we can probably have both Amy and Margetta take a turn at answering. So the question is, and this comes from a brand, I have been told by an ingredient provider that I'm allowed to use their ingredient in my product. They have also let me know that there is a claim. What do I need to be aware of to double check that I can actually use the ingredient? So maybe we'll have Amy take that question on first as it relates to human products, and then Margetta as it relates to livestock and pet supplements.
Sure. Well, I think that there's two questions in that question. First, it's regulatory. Is it compliant? And the supplier of that ingredient should be able to provide you with the basis on which they rely for their ingredient being compliant for the use. If they can't, then that's a concern. And then for the claim, if they say that their ingredient has a structure function claim that's substantiated, then they should have proof of that substantiation in file. And any company that's putting, and I'm assuming this is a dietary supplement product, any company that puts a dietary supplement on the market and makes a structure function claim in the labeling, they are required to have substantiation in file and also notify FDA of that claim made in the labeling. And that is a simple notification process. But if someone's supplying you with an ingredient and they say they have substantiation supporting the claim, you should ask for that so you have that in your file should you ever be challenged.
Yeah, and the same applies for in the animal or livestock space. The only thing I would add to that is just remember that it's for animals, it has to be in the target species. Any information they provide should be in the target species and at that life stage that they are targeting. So they should be able to provide the same information Amy's talking about for humans, but it does have to be specifically for the species and the life stage that's applicable.
Excellent, thank you. And another one has come in for Amy. And the question here is, are there different regulations and safety studies for a food ingredient that has multiple intended uses, such as provide color, flavor, as well as mineral content?
Thanks for that question. Yes, there are different regulations in place for if it imparts color. So if it's providing flavor or if it's providing minerals, excuse me, then that could go under GRAS. But a color, if it imparts color, that does drive a color additive petition if that is what the ingredient's being used for. So when it comes to the safety studies, again, for a food or color additive petition in GRAS, the safety bar is the same. If you have GRAS studies in place that support the GRAS status of that ingredient, that should be sufficient for the color additive petition process when it comes to the safety study.
Excellent. So if anyone else has any more questions, certainly pop them into the chat. I think that we've answered most. And if by chance I've missed yours, have no fear. We will certainly get back to you with an answer to your question. And yeah, I just wanted to really thank all of the presenters. And for the audience, I know that we've covered a lot of content today. So we will be sending this out in a recording and you will have the slides as well. But certainly get in touch with us directly because each situation is always a little bit different. There's always a nuance. We always start off typically in our engagements with, as Amy has described, with a gap analysis. So we're going to look at the information that you have. We want to have a very clear understanding of your business goals. We will then compare the information that you have to what we know is needed for the regulatory filing. We'll present that back to you and then together help you make the proper business decision on whether it's feasible to move forward or if there's a lot of other scientific data that is necessary prior to doing so. And we'll also give you an opinion on the relevance and the relative success level. So all of the folks that you've had present today and the staff here at SGS Nutrasource, GRAS Associates, have many, many years, over 20 years of experience typically in dealing with the direct regulatory bodies. We have just gone deep today on US, but for everyone in the audience, I do want to let you know that we do provide the same advice and regulatory filings and information for Canada. And then we also coordinate everything that happens in the EU through our partners. And now that we are a part of SGS, we have the capability of coordinating the ingredient regulatory in whichever market that you're looking to get into. So certainly come to us for all of your ingredient needs, whether they relate with food, livestock, pet supplements, or if you want to get into pharmaceuticals. And we're happy to point you in the right direction and involve the proper folks that are necessary for you to achieve the regulatory status that you want to sell into a market. And then going one level deeper, should you need safety testing, as Margetta explained, we will oversee the testing for you at the labs to make sure that it's done in a manner and the reports that are coming back are ready for your regulatory file. So that's for the safety ones that we will oversee. And as you heard from Josh, when you take the next step beyond safety and you want to make a claim with either efficacy or different aspects that will take your ingredient to a branded level, or take your finished product as a brand into a new realm that requires a clinical trial in humans. We are happy to organize that. We are the CRO for that. We have access to 400 sites across the world, and we take care of all the applications, the medical writing, the statistics, etc. So we really are a one-stop shop for both ingredient providers, contract manufacturers that are looking for this advice, either for a white label product they're using, and also working with the brands who are also selling out to consumers. And as I mentioned, in future webinars, we will discuss our other service offerings, the third-party marketing certification programs that brands like to put on their labels. We have very specific ones for omega-3s, probiotics, non-GMO, and overall quality. So again, we will distribute the information for those webinars. And we just really want to thank you for attending and taking the time out of your day. And we look forward to meeting many folks, working with you, and expanding our relationship and helping you expand your sales into new markets and achieve your business goals. So with that, we'll wrap up the seminar, and thanks once again. And hopefully, if anybody's at Supply Side West, we'll see you there. And then we will also always let people know other shows that we're going to, because we attend numerous shows across the US and also globally. So thanks once again, and we hope everyone has a great day.